Vanessa, straight away, we're going to kick off, and you've got I think, a really important section here, which is what's happening in Niger in Africa.
Yeah, very interesting developments, of course. Now, 3 Sahel countries, 60 million population, have had popular coups in the last few months, and 7th military takeover in Sahel since 2020. Sorry, if we can just play the video from Nico House, an analyst that everyone can follow on YouTube, on Twitter, etc. He gives a pretty good summary of what has happened so far.
So in case you missed the news, Niger has had a military coup, and I'm letting you know right now, before all the Western media tells you they want democracy back in Niger, let me tell you the real reason for this coup and why not all coups are created equally. This is Mohamed Bazoum, the former or current, depending on how you look at it, president of Niger. As you can see, he's a little bit cozy with Emmanuel Macron. This is important, and we're going to talk about it in a second. You see, Macron is actually the president of France, and 70% of France's electricity comes from nuclear power. Niger is the 4th largest producer of uranium in the world, and guess who predominantly mines their uranium? A French company called Areva. Guess whose company provides most of the nuclear power to France? Areva. Now, despite Niger basically being a French colony, their president basically being a puppet of Macron in France, only 1 in 7 people who live in Niger have power, despite the majority of their #1 resource, which provides power, going to France basically for free. So because of the president's loyalty to Macron and unwillingness to fight for Nigerians, people in Niger literally can't keep their lights on if they've ever had lights at all. While France plunders Niger for its natural resources. And you're going to have plenty of Western media people and leaders from the Western world coming out and saying they want democracy in Niger. But let's not forget, this is the same US and France that overthrew Gaddafi in Libya, and we literally have open market slavery in Libya right now in 2023, and they haven't done anything about it because they don't care about democratically elected individuals unless they play for the team.
So very interesting sort of introduction to what's going on. The one point that I would make is Areva now has been rebranded as Orano. Orano has set up a crisis unit in Niger since the military overthrow. They claim that only 1 of their mines is operational, although they have 3 mines currently in Niger. So the headlines from the West, how a pro-Putin coup threatens Europe's nuclear supplies. Of course, it's Russia's fault, Putin's fault. Russia rapidly expands its influence in Niger in an alliance against the West. Nothing to do, of course, with the neo-colonialist raping and plundering of the African continent for decades. Then moving on, we can see this is from Africa Archives on Twitter. The military regime in Niger has, with immediate effect, banned the export of uranium to France, over 50%. I have to say that the figures are varying on the uranium ore extraction from Niger, which is used for fueling French nuclear power plants. 24% of EU uranium imports comes from Niger. Now, I have also been reading that the actual export has not yet been stopped, but there is potential that it will be stopped, and there are definitely fears in Europe that it will be stopped. So moving on. So the US, this is interesting, sees a narrow opportunity to reverse the coup in Niger as ousted president meets Chad's leader. So let's see what the US has to say. Pretty predictable if we move on. So it still sees a narrow window of opportunity to reverse a military takeover, a senior US official said on Monday. Niger's democratically, so there you have the democratic trope coming in, elected President Mohamed Bazoum, who was ousted in a coup last week, was seen for the first time in photographs released on Monday, carrying on. So again, we have the repetition of the fact that it's been the anchor for a Western-backed counterterrorism campaign for years in Africa's volatile Sahel region, even though, of course, we know that Boko Haram and the various Al-Qaeda, ISIS affiliates have been, in fact, incubated and implanted there by the West to disrupt China and Russia's influence, particularly in this region. They have called Niger a democratic model for the region, et cetera, et cetera. So we're hearing exactly, as Nico mentioned, these democratic labels being put upon the deposed government. A recap, 7.5% of world uranium is extracted from Niger. Population, 17 million, one of the poorest nations in the world. Life expectancy, is 45, and 1 in 4 children die before the age of 5. France's only interest is to mine the uranium in the sub-Saharan desert. Over 50% of uranium extracted from Niger is to light France. Only 10 to 20% of people in Niger urban areas have electricity, as was mentioned. So moving on, I think now to the map. So this shows you where Niger is. It's interesting to note that Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Algeria have all come out in support of the interim government in Niger. Very interesting. And remember that from previous reports on UK column, I pointed out that the NATO forces have withdrawn effectively to Mauritania, to the northwest of Niger, and the coalition of African nations that is now forming against imperialism. Very interesting times here. Moving on to, I think, what do I have next? Yes. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who is effectively the interim president of Burkina Faso. From him, when we the people decide to defend ourselves, we are called militias. I presume he means in the West. But that is not the problem. The problem is to see African heads of state who bring nothing to these people who are fighting, but who sing the same songs as the imperialists, calling us militias, calling us men who don't respect human rights. What human rights are we talking about? We take offense at this, and it's shameful. We African heads of state must stop behaving like puppets who dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. Glory to our people, victory to our people, fatherland or death, we shall conquer. Now, this reminds me very much of Thomas Sankara, also former leader assassinated of Burkina Faso. And here we have a short statement from Ibrahim Traoré on neocolonialism. It's in French with subtitles.
Les questions que mes générations se posent sont les suivantes, si je peux me résumer. C'est de ne pas comprendre comment l'Afrique, avec tant de richesses sur notre sol, avec une nature généreuse, de l'eau, du soleil en abondance, l'Afrique est aujourd'hui le continent le plus pauvre. L'Afrique est un continent affamé. Et comment se fait-il que les chefs d'État traversent donc le monde à mendier? Voici des questions que nous nous posons et que nous n'avons pas de réponse jusque-là. Nous avons l'occasion de tisser de nouvelles relations. Et j'espère que ces relations puissent être les meilleures pour donner un meilleur avenir à nos peuples. Pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso, aujourd'hui, nous sommes confrontés depuis plus de 8 ans à la forme de manifestation la plus barbare, la plus violente du néocolonialisme, de l'impérialisme. L'esclavage qu'on tend encore à nous imposer.
And as mentioned, Burkina Faso and Mali say that they will not consider a regional military intervention in Niger as or they will consider, a regional military intervention in Niger as a declaration of war against them. Of course, the France and the UK, James Cleverly, are going through ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, to impose sanctions now on the Niger government, the new government. And they're talking about using force on Sunday to reimpose the so-called democratic government of President Mohamed Bazoum. So basically, Mali and Burkina Faso have refused to enforce the illegal, illegitimate, and inhuman sanctions, as I said, imposed by ECOWAS against the people and authorities of Niger. Both countries made their stance clear, emphasizing that any military intervention against Niger would be considered a declaration of war against Burkina Faso and Mali. Such an intervention would prompt their withdrawal from the organization itself. And also, as I mentioned, Algeria and Guinea have come out in support of Niger. Here again, Traoré mentions in a speech to Putin recently in St. Petersburg, I want to note that the friendship at this important stage between the Russian and the Burkinese people Russia is currently conducting a special military operation, and be sure that our people support you. We support your government. Some of our traditional partners turn their backs on us, and then we see who our true friend is, namely Russia, which supported us back in the era of colonization and continues to support us today. And then I think we have a short video, again, Traore addressing Putin. I recommend following this channel on YouTube, Swahili Nation. They're doing a very good job of keeping up with events in Africa at the moment.
I think that during the summit we learned about the events in Niger, where the military took over the government, and that affects us directly. And I mentioned that in my address yesterday. I also met with some heads of states on the sidelines of the summit, and they shared about things that happen in their countries, in our region. So indirectly, something that these are the challenges that Russia notices. So I think that we need to take into account these parameters in our diplomatic relations, and I also think that we need to work towards lifting all sanctions, and we want to see a multipolar world where every country is and so basically what we're seeing here is an emergence of a new pan-Arabism, just as we've seen recently the emergence of a new pan-Africanism. And we've seen a new emergence of pan-Arabism across the Arab world with the normalization of relations with Syria. And I just want to end on a slightly lighter note. This was a Ugandan diplomat from the embassy in Russia in St. Petersburg, who caused quite a stir by wearing a Putin T-shirt to day one of the Russia-African summit. Just roll this just quickly to see him. As I said, just to end Vanessa, on a lighter note.
Vanessa, just give us a few words for that, because obviously there was no commentary. So for people listening in, what did you pick up?
Well, I mean, I think what this is symbolic of, I mean, it is comical and it caused quite a stir, but I think it's sending quite a serious message, is that now what we're seeing across the Sahel region in particular is the overthrow of pro-colonization governments in favor of military regimes that are interested in establishing a pan-Africanism and protecting, nationalizing their own resources and preventing the plundering of those resources by imperialist nations, namely France and the UK and other countries in the EU. So I think, although it was a comical moment, I think it also carries a very important symbol to the West, that Africa now feels that it has allies upon which it can rely to bring them into economic security, food security, energy security, and the multipolar world that they are all talking about. Extraordinary times, actually.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you for that excellent segment. What came into my mind, of course, was Tony Blair and, of course, Theresa May calling at one stage for greater EU military intervention in the whole of that area of Africa. So I think there's a lot more to come. We'll leave that one there. Thank you very much. Well, let's move over.